So we're going to continue this conversation this week on this subversive Jesus. And what we're talking about, this is a world where you have to lose your life to save it. Where losers are winners. Where the poor are lifted up. Where the last come first, where a king is found in a lowly shepherd boy. This is a really weird world. Nothing is normal. A world where literally victory comes not through taking life, but through Jesus sacrificing his own life. The lion is the lamb. It's a peculiar place, this upside down world, where kingdoms and principalities have lost their power. Where the winners of capitalism aren't controlling the losers of capitalism. This is the world that we're talking about. And what's exciting about this place is that you get freed, in a way, from everything that is taken in a world of power and control and domination. And so over the next, in the last few weeks, but over the next few weeks, we want to press into this and look at what does it mean to live out a faith based on a Jesus that literally lost to win. What does that look like? How does the world get turned upside down? This morning I want to talk about hospitality. We like to have people over. Martha Stewart has some really great recipes and dinner table ideas and things that we can really spruce the place up with. We really like the whole world of hospitality. Right? We're all on the same page? This is funny because the ancient world the biblical world talked a lot about hospitality, being hospitable to your neighbor. There's in Jewish festivals centered around the idea of hospitality. We walk through our text and laws that regulate your hospitality to your neighbor, to the foreigner, to the enemy. Everywhere you go, there's this pressure on hospitality. And we've turned it into this nice, cute word that we have dinner and invite some other well-mannered people over that say their please and thank yous. And it's lost all of its power, if I could use that word this morning. So what are we talking about when we're called to be hospitable, when we're called to hospitality? I want to try this phrase out. I've been playing with this phrase for a long time. I'm a big fan of it, but in a world where radical doesn't really mean the same thing as it used to, radical hospitality may not have the same ring that I'm looking for. But this is what I want us to be thinking about. What does radical hospitality look like? It's been a bit now since we had sort of our own miniature Lower East Side happening on the back road of Maple Ridge. But all the people are still there. They're just not visible to our community. Radical hospitality calls us into a space that looks at people differently. And the important piece, I'll be honest, the important piece is looking at people differently. You see, we go and live in this world where winners are winners and losers aren't winners. And we're supposed to look at people in a certain way. We're supposed to treat people in a certain way. That means there are times when you don't make eye contact. The implication is that somebody doesn't deserve eye contact. The reality is we feel really awkward about maybe our place of privilege, somebody other than us, disparity between wealth and poverty. We live in a world where we bump up against that every day. In New Orleans, this was even starker because you would literally cross the street and move from multi-million-dollar homes and walk across the street because the line stopped right there from one district to another. And on the other side of that street were these dilapidated homes literally falling down. Holes in the sides of houses, and the dynamics and the people changed in an instant. Here we have a little bit more freedom. It's a weird word here, but a little bit more freedom to hide and protect ourselves from that. And so if we don't want to see, and this is what cleaning up Maple Ridge looked like, if we don't want to see homeless people living on the streets, we don't have to. We just don't go that way. We don't drive by that street. We look the other way when we cross that intersection. Whatever that is, we get to choose not to see it. And radical hospitality calls us into a place that demands that we see it. I've been reading this book alongside this series. I think his name is Craig Greenfield, and he moved. Well, first of all, he moved his family into the slums of Cambodia. That's a bit removed. It's hard for us to grasp even what that means. But here's what's interesting. The next thing he did was moved his family into the Vancouver East Side, a house on East Hastings, and began inviting people into his home off the street every day for meals. That's a different kind of hospitality. He tells this story about this one gentleman that would always talk about going to the meals, and he would say in every invitation to a friend, sometimes they'd have 30 or 40 people show up to dinner. And at every invitation for somebody new, this gentleman would say, it's a please pass the butter kind of experience. And Craig, it sort of identifies, it's like pass the butter is the high class of the situation, that there's a table at which you can pass the butter. But what happened in that moment is people saw God through being welcomed into their home. What happens in that moment of radical hospitality is barriers are broken down. People are treated like humans. Crazy, right? And in this, what seems too dangerous, too bold, too irrational, too big of a dream, he simply invites people into his home to have dinner. And it creates space for community. It creates space for love, for relationship, for that expression of human dignity. Jesus lived this way. Everywhere he went, and this is the absolute epitome of what we're reading when we read the story of Jesus, is that we are watching Jesus look at people in a way that no one else is looking at them. He looks people in the eyes. He touches them. He not like inappropriately, it came out weird. He's willing to be in their space with them. I don't know if it's a hug or a pat on the shoulder or a kiss on the cheek, but I'm sure it was appropriate behavior. Yet at the same time, totally inappropriate for the norms and what was expected of people in their behavior and in the social setting. This is radical hospitality. This moment when Mary and Martha are sitting, one of them is sitting in the front room while the other is working in the kitchen, is a moment of radical hospitality. You see, Jesus is teaching this woman something, not to be brash here, but something that women weren't allowed to do, or men weren't allowed to teach women. She shouldn't even be in the same room with him. But he looks at her differently. He treats her differently. She's given dignity and honor in that moment as a human being. I spent time when we were in New Orleans attempting, anyway, to do community development work. The idea is that you work in and with a community, a neighborhood, a family, whatever that looks like, to allow them to find the agency to pull their own community up. You see, we have this idea that we can fix things. We have some money, we have a program, we have a list of needs that this community over here or whatever has, and we can walk in with our lab coats, study it, figure it out, go to the principalities and get the financing, and then go help and save a community. Real Messiah kind of mentality. And the idea behind this community development, often asset-based community development, is that you go in, you work with people, you help them find their energy and the things that they want to see in their community, and they find the strength and the finances and everything that they need to work through that and improve their own community. It's a radically different idea than how we often do charity work. What happens in this room, in this dinner with Craig and his family and a few others that lived with him in this communal home on the east side, was just that. He invited people in and doesn't say, "Let me feed you," like the soup kitchens. He says, "Come in. If this is your first time, have a seat. If this is not your first time, well, you know what to do." And they cooked and they cleaned. They did the dishes. They prepped the food. They served one another. The radical hospitality in that moment was allowing them to take part as well as the food itself. Jesus had his own moment like this. Many, but let's look at one. In Matthew, where are we? Chapter 14 or something like that. There's this nice little cute story about Jesus multiplying fish, and the kids count all the baskets, and there's this cute little boy with his little basket of fish and bread, and he feeds the whole 5,000 people. But let's back up a sentence or two. And here's what's happening when Jesus comes ashore in this moment in Matthew chapter 14. He sees a crowd of people and has compassion on them. Why do you start a story like that? What does that tell you about what's going on? Well, let me put it this way. I don't stand up here and look out at a crowd of people and say, I really have compassion for these people. I mean, I do. But in a totally different kind of way, Jesus looked out on a crowd of people that required compassion. He healed the sick. He came to look after them. And his disciples recognized that it was getting late and this crowd was still here and there's nothing around for miles, and said, Jesus, it's time to send them on their way so that they can get their own food. If these are people that require compassion, healing, sickness, let's add in poverty. Nobody has food with them. If these are people that require that, sending them into the towns to get their own meal is not a reality. That's not what's going to happen when you send them on their way. You push their needs, just like we do to our homeless community, you push their needs to the margins where you can't see it, where you don't have to look into their eyes as they don't have that meal. Hospitality is lost in that moment. And Jesus responds to them, the disciples. They need not go away. You give them something to eat. But they don't have anything. They don't have their own food. And so in this beautiful moment of sharing resources, they find one boy with fish and bread. And as they break up into pockets of communal feasting, the bread and the fish are multiplied, and the people care and share with one another, for and with one another. You see, that's that moment that Craig is creating in his house on East Hastings. It is you come in, you enjoy this with us. Together we prepare. Together we are one. God cares for us all. So often we have this opportunity, this privilege to drive by and look the other way, to put them in a shelter where we don't see them, to hide them off the back sides of the streets so that most of our community doesn't have to look at them. And Jesus says, no. Bring them in. Share and commune with one another. Look at each one with dignity and purpose and through the eyes of God. We spend a lot of time on hospitality. Some of us, some not, whatever. This is a different kind of hospitality. It doesn't require opening your home, although it could. It doesn't require some major crazy feat of gathering resources and finances and people to make a meal happen on a daily or weekly basis or whatever that is. A large piece of this is simply looking at people differently, as Jesus looked at each individual differently. And while we're talking about that, let's expand the conversation. Because in this upside down world, the people with power and control and privilege are not just those with money, although that happens. It is also those that are in the right social place, that have the right kinds of jobs. that love the right kinds of people, that look the right kind of way. We can go on and on and on and see how hospitality is lacking in our world. And the call of Jesus, the call of God, and throughout the text, we see this world turned upside down, is to look at people differently. Abraham was just a nomad that looked at the world differently, that saw God differently. Moses was literally rescued from death to be put in one of the highest places of the kingdom. Puts him in a place to come back and look at people and have compassion on them and work with them to bring them out of slavery. The prophets stopped and looked out at the world and the people and what the kings and kingdoms were doing and the way the principalities controlled and abused their own people. And God used them to call for a new way of living. And when Jesus shows up to the scene, everything that we thought we knew about religion and God is turned upside down again. Because it is not through a military takeover that Jesus' kingdom is going to come into place. It is literally through undoing the status quo and giving up his own life that we see God's victory. Is there another place in the world where that's how things work? This is an upside down kind of place. And the freedom that comes in being able to let go of those things that our culture and our society demands of us allows us to live in community in a whole new way. We're all afraid of communal living. I don't know. If I proposed that, you go, okay, Brownlee's trying to take this cult direction. We should probably bail now. But that's what the early church did. This radical understanding of people was they lived together, shared together, and allowed themselves to serve and exist and love one another in a way that radically changed and challenged the status quo. I wish I had like a really definitive, okay, here's how you go out and do this right now. Because I don't think you're going to live on East Hastings or I mean, you guys, Laundries kind of have a commune thing going, but that's also outside of what most of us are capable of doing. But here's the starting point. Look at people differently. Here's the starting point. Allow God's love to flow through you into the lives of each person you come in contact with. And put yourself in some awkward situations. If it's awkward, it might be a good place for you to be, to let that happen, to let God work through you, to let yourself look at someone differently.